Geneviève Lantelme, born Mathilde Hortense Claire Fossey in May 1883, dying in July 1911, was a French stage actress, socialite, fashionista, and courtesan. Considered by her contemporaries to be one of the most beautiful women of the Belle Epoque era, and bearing a resemblance to American actress Ethel Barrymore, Genevieve is remembered for the mysterious circumstances of her death. On the night of July 24th or 25th, 1911, she fell from the yacht of her husband, Alfred Edwards. She died at the age of 28, and her death has never been entirely solved. Mathilde Hortense Claire Fossey was born on May 20th, 1883, in Paris, the third child to Edouard Fossey, a cashier who later became an accountant, and Claire Fossey née Lantelme, from a musical family. Genevieve had two older sisters as well as one younger sister. When she was born, the family lived in Paris, Boulevard Barbès 5, but they often moved. In 1882, they lived in a different district, and in 1888, they lived in Paris' 9th district. There was a lot of great material on this on the Verbenina blog, which has since been shut down. In 1895, Genevieve's parents divorced, and the court gave custody of the children to Edward, who had been tutoring the children, in addition to providing for them via his job. Despite this support, Genevieve, or Jeanette, as she would be known on the stage, adopted her mother's maiden name. In 1897, when Genevieve was 14, her father remarried, and the family left Paris for Nanterre. Another French actress at the turn of the century, Simone Labarge, who co-starred with Genevieve in later plays, wrote about Genevieve in her memoirs, in which she claimed Genevieve ended up in a brothel run by her mother at the age of 14. At 14, she was one of the lures at her mother's brothel, but soon became an acclaimed Paris actress. Theater-goers savored her reputation for enjoying the bodies of men and women with equal pleasure. Her languid slouch was imitated by other Parisian vamps. This is not unlikely due to the sheer number of women working in brothels in France's Third Republic after the fall of Napoleon. Up to 1 million women at the time worked in brothels. The women had to register at their prefecture in order to work in a brothel. Each woman had to have a twice-weekly medical checkup, which was perceived as the most degrading part of their job and abhorred by the prostitutes. In April 1831, 3,131 girls were registered at the Paris prefecture. The Third Republic was marked by a huge increase in government and bureaucrats, and as with any increase in a largely lazy and degenerate class, prostitution followed due to an increase in demand. The women received a registration card and the brothels a registration number. Prostitutes recognized by the state were said to be soumises, as opposed to those working secretly, known as insoumises, who were punished. This regulation lasted until the closing of the brothels in 1946. Soliciting was prohibited, and the women were confined to their registered brothels. It was at this time that Alexandre Parent du Châtelet published Prostitution in the City of Paris, in which he noted the misery and poverty of prostitutes, which he estimated to be at 10,000 in Paris alone, and the poor functioning of medical control from the government. The Third Republic of France, lasting from 1870 to 1940, was the French golden age of brothels, and they were accepted as part of social life. The state and the tax authorities benefited from this trade by taking up to 60% of the girls' profits. In Genevieve's story, we also see the enrichment of various immoral men by her body. This was the era of famous houses, such as La Chabanais and La Sphinx, which are still known internationally. In Paris, there were about 200 official brothels in the middle of the century under the control of the police and doctors. This fell to about 60 at the end of the century as a result of the multiplication of illegal brothels, which were then employing 15,000 prostitutes. From approximately 1871 to 1903, the writer Maxime Duchamp counted 155,000 women officially registered as prostitutes, but during the same period, the police stopped 725,000 women for undercover or secret prostitution. So this is where we see the almost a million French women working as prostitutes during the Third Republic. With very slow legislation and the collapse of the Napoleonic era, which pushed schools for women, jobs for women were scarce. With the establishment of mandated primary schooling in the 1880s, secondary schools were not available until the 1930s. And so, in the Third Republic, we see a descent into chaos and incompletion. The French prostitute was a sub-citizen, subject to regulations whose application was left in the hands of corrupt police officials and bureaucrats. A series of scandals led to the dissolution of the Vice Squad in 1881, although it was reformed in 1901. In 1911, the police prefect Lepine authorized houses of rendezvous, where prostitutes did not live but where they could come to work. These included cafes with waitresses, 115 of which opened in Paris that year. So we see the bastardization of legitimate work, waitressing, to illegitimate work, prostitution, applied to women. Other houses of rendezvous included perfumeries and bathing and massage houses. The police estimated that 40,000 clients a day frequented the various houses, which would be equivalent to saying that a quarter of Parisian men had relations with prostitutes daily. The traditional brothel, inherited from the brothels of the 19th century, underwent two major changes from around 1920. The prostitutes tended not to live in the brothels in that time, as the brothel was to occupy an entire building and the girls were boarders in order to contain prostitution in one part of the building. In the 1920s, in the face of real estate pressure, with many French dead on the war front who would have occupied and run provincial farms, combined with a lot of expatriates coming to France and living there, regulations allowed girls free to advertise outside. The hygiene requirements became increasingly important after World War I, which saw spikes of STDs worldwide. Genevieve was trafficked to powerful men, including Henri Poidatz, 29 years Genevieve's senior, banker and owner of La Matin newspaper, whose mistress she became in her late teens. Simone wrote about the pair, saying that Poidatz had hidden and parsimonious attentions, but Genevieve didn't care. In addition to being a journalist, Poidatz was also a private banker and may have received Genevieve as the payment for some sort of debt. Around this time, Genevieve found Madame L'Herbe, an actress of Odeon, later the Comédie Française, who agreed to give her lessons around 1900 in Paris, as the two women lived within walking distance from each other at that time. Madame L'Herbe appears on film in 1939's La Fin du Jour. With Poidat's backing, Genevieve, who wanted to become an actress, embarked on a stage career. She was recommended by Poidatz to his friend Alphonse Franck, the manager of the Théâtre du Gymnase in Paris, where she made her debut in a comedy on Halloween 1901 in La Bascule. She played the tiny part of a housemaid with a few lines of dialogue. A few weeks later, she played another tiny role in Le Détour, written by Zionist Henry Bernstein. The leading part was performed by Simone Labarge, actress and later writer, who would describe Genevieve in her memoirs. Genevieve appeared to her in 1902, she wrote. Thin waist, full throat, narrow hands and feet. She had immense and superb brown eyes, a row of eyelashes like the stars, and the most perfect nose that nature ever modeled, a beautiful red mouth, rather large, whose upper lip, a little short, raised a little over small set teeth. The teeth of happiness, say the omens, gave to this face an air of surprising naivete. She also described her as clumsy and seemingly in need of protector after protector. After a few insignificant stage roles, Genevieve played in Le Secret de Polichinelle, a comedy written by Pierre Wolfe, then a famous writer. This was a critically acclaimed performance, and in 1902 her pictures appear for the first time in Le Mode, one of the best Belle Epoque magazines, and later in other fashion magazines. Although she was first dressed rather modestly, she started her career of fashion model then. In 1902, she had an important relationship with the writer Oscar Métainier, and his friend wrote later about their love mixed with scandals and fights when Genevieve used not only her hands but also chairs to fight. In 1896, Métainier's Mademoiselle Fifi, previously temporarily banned by the police, was the first ever French play to include a prostitute character. His preferred company was prostitutes, and in 1897 he bought a theater at the end of the Impasse Chaptal to present his own plays, all of which contained pornographic elements. This was the Theatre du Grand Guignol, and he remained its director until 1898. In October 1903, Genevieve entered the Conservatoire de Paris to study acting, where she was taught by an actor from the Comédie Française named Maurice de Feraudy. Although the students of the Conservatoire were technically not allowed to perform in theaters before they graduated, Genevieve did so under the name of Tell Me. She completed her course of study without receiving any prizes or distinctions, as her comic talent was not valued by her school or her teachers, and she resumed stage appearances under her own name. In April 1905, she opened in a play whose leading role was played by the legendary actress Réjeanne. Upon hearing that her friend Alfred Edwards, a media tycoon and amateur playwright, had written a play called Par Ricochet and was looking for an actress, Réjeanne introduced Edwards to Genevieve, who soon became his mistress. However, Edwards, 27 years Genevieve's senior, may have come into Genevieve's life earlier. In 1895, Edwards sold the newspaper Le Matin to the banker and Genevieve protector, or Jean, Henry Poidatz. With the sale, Edwards launched new projects, financing the illustrated journal Le Petit Bleu de Paris and creating Le Petit Sou for his own political ends. A millionaire personality known to all Paris, he bought Rousseau's Hermitage at Montmorency, as well as the Theatre de Paris and its adjoining casino. Edwards was highly thought of among women at the time, marrying in succession Miss Durart, Helene Bailey, Jeanne Charcot in 1881, and then in 1905 Misha Godebska, or Misha Sert, the Queen of Paris pianist. Misha Godebska Nantensen married the financier Alfred Edwards after being married to her cousin, a common Jewish tradition emulated by Albert Einstein, among many others. She and Edwards took up an opulent lifestyle in their apartment on Rue de Rivoli of the right bank, overlooking the Tuileries Paris. Here she continued to welcome artists, writers, and musicians in her home. Maurice Ravel dedicated the Swan to her and the Waltz to her. Her husband accompanied Enrico Caruso on the piano. Misha accompanied Enrico Caruso on the piano while the Italian opera star entertained the assembled listeners with a repertoire of Neapolitan songs. After Alfred Edwards proved unfaithful and took up with the actress Geneviève Lantelme, Misha divorced him in February 1909. But back in 1905, Genevieve's protector Poidatz was dead, and Genevieve was looking for another protector. In September 1906, Genevieve signed a contract with the Theatre Regin, but she broke it in January 1908 because she was frustrated that the lead actress, Regin, was given all of the leading roles. Regin sued Genevieve for breach of contract and won. The young actress had to pay 20,000 francs in damages, an enormous sum at the time, and it's unclear who actually paid. Despite this setback, 1908 was a turning point for Genevieve, because it was in this year that she finally landed a leading role in a hit play, starring in Le Roi. As a result of her success, she graced the covers of magazines like Le Theatre, Le Mode, and Féminin, and appeared on dozens of postcards. During her short career in the limelight, Genevieve was photographed often and featured in newspapers and magazines in both Europe and the United States. She was considered the most photographed French actress during her lifetime. Celebrated for her fashion sense as well as her beauty, she frequently collaborated with French fashion artists and rose them up in French society. She collaborated with Madeleine Vianney and the first major female couturier Jeanne Paquin, two prominent French fashion designers, to produce Genevieve's memorable clothing ensembles. Madeleine Vianney was a French fashion designer best known for being the pioneer of the bias-cut dress. Vianney trained in London before returning to France to establish her first fashion house in Paris in 1912. Jeanne Paquet favored the pastels in fashion at the time. Eventually, she moved on to stronger colors like black and her signature red. Black had been traditionally the color of mourning, but Jeanne made the color fashionable by blending it with vividly colorful linings and embroidered trim. She established her house of fashion right next to the House of Worth, which you can learn about on this channel. Jeanne was also the first woman to accept France's Legion d'Honneur, and you can learn about another female recipient, Edith Wharton, on this channel. At its height, the House of Paquet was so well known that Wharton mentioned the company by name in her novel, The House of Mirth. At a time when couture houses employed 50 to 400 workers, the House of Paquet employed up to 2,000 people at its height. The queens of Spain, Belgium, and Portugal were all her customers. So were courtesans such as La Belle Otero and Liane de Pougy, and Genevieve, who all bolstered the success of this woman-run business. Genevieve was also known for her huge hats, as can be seen in the postcards and other images of her that are collected to this day. From 1906 to 1909, Genevieve shared Alfred Edwards' attentions with his fourth wife, Misha. Misha was extremely jealous of Genevieve and said in her memoirs, "I had contrived to get a photograph of Lantelme. It adorned my dressing table, and I made desperate efforts to look like her, dress my hair in the same way, wear the same clothes." Marcel Proust used this as a model for society hostess Gilbert's jealousy of Rachel, the Jewish prostitute, elegant man Saint Loup, and his unsuitable female partner in his novel. Part of the mystery of Genevieve is that she was allegedly bisexual and had affairs with both men and women. She certainly ruffled a lot of feathers in her lifetime, not least due to her affairs with married men. Eventually, Genevieve won the battle for Edward's affections, and on July 5, 1909, Genevieve and Edwards married. At this time, Edwards' political leanings favored moderate Republicans, and his paper, Le Petit Sou, was drawing ire from socialists and communists. If a strong nationalist voice emerged before World War I, a lot of globalist plans and profits would be ruined. The Rothschild family had financially backed the Regent Theatre, which had sued Genevieve for 20,000 francs. Edwards' former paper, Le Matin, devolved into a Zionist mouthpiece during the Dreyfus Affair under the handling of Poydats, who stuffed it with advertising rather than content. Le Matin eventually reached nationalist heights until it abruptly stopped circulating in 1944. But in the Belle Epoque, ill will and political strife was everywhere. In early July 1911, Genevieve, her husband Edwards, and a few of their friends boarded Edwards' yacht L'Ami, which had been built for Edwards' ex-wife, Misha. She could not have been happy about that. On the night of July 24th or 25th, Genevieve disappeared, and a few days later her body was discovered in the waters of the Rhine River. The official verdict was that the actress had drowned as the result of a tragic accident. She was most likely under the influence of cocaine and alcohol at the time of her death. However, many people speculated that Edwards had murdered his fifth wife. But did he, or was she the victim of political strife, or a jealous wife or ex-lover? In the autumn of 1911, two French newspapers, Le Dépêche Parlementaire and Le Griffe, published their accusation that Edwards had murdered his wife. Edwards sued the publications for libel and won, although both newspapers escaped severe punishment, and it could be because Edwards was suffering from influenza at that time. Genevieve was buried at Père Lachaise in the Edwards Mausoleum. A few months after her burial in December 1912, her tomb was opened by grave robbers who were looking for the jewels that were buried with her. The jewels were in an envelope under her head and they didn't find them. After this incident, she was reburied in Division 94. Edwards was buried in the mausoleum after his death in 1914 from influenza. Despite his strings of wives prior, he never remarried. What do you think happened?